Hello and good morning. I'm Eric Schambarger, Director of Environmental Sustainability for the City of Milwaukee, and I lead the Environmental Collaboration Office, or ECO. Today, we are excited to share with you a presentation on the city's climate and equity plan. Um, Really excited about this project. Mayor Johnson signed the climate and equity plan into law in June of 2023, and again, it's a really comprehensive plan that I think is really going to transform Milwaukee for the good. So we'll give a presentation today. It is being recorded, and we look forward to, again, working with the community to implement this exciting plan. So the goals of the climate and equity plan are twofold. First, it's to reduce community greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030 and to achieve net zero emissions by the year 2050. And while we are reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which are the root cause of climate change, we are also trying to create a new, more just economy that improves racial and economic equity by creating green jobs that pay at least $40,000 a year. And we're focusing our recruitment on local people of color who have been historically left out of the full economy. So those two goals of climate and racial equity and economic equity are working hand in glove with this goal. The reason we have a climate and equity plan is because of the global climate crisis. So reputable entities like the United Nations, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change agree that the planet's climate is drastically changing, primarily due to human activity. Yes, the climate has always changed, but we'll see that the huge use of fossil fuels since the Industrial Revolution has really created problems for our climate, and that is going to create overall challenges. But when we burn fossil fuels like coal and petroleum and natural gas, what happens is those fuels don't just go away; they turn into greenhouse gases that trap heat and are really wreaking havoc on our environment. The trouble is these fossil fuels are in all elements of our economy. It's used to create electricity, to heat our buildings, to power our vehicles and equipment, as well as in industrial processes. So moving away from fossil fuels requires changes in all facets of our economy. So some of these impacts include extreme storms and flooding, heat waves and urban heat islands, loss of biodiversity, and more. I really feel like in Milwaukee, this issue of extreme storms and flooding is the one that we have to be most concerned about. But we, as in Milwaukee, are part of planet Earth, and impacts around the world have ripple effects here in Milwaukee. Unpacking that a bit more, the University of Wisconsin-Madison predicts that Milwaukee will see 3 times as many days of a heat index above 105 degrees, which will worsen health risks. This is particularly an issue with the humidity we have around the lake. So it's not just the temperature, but the combination of high humidity and temperature can create these dangerous heat indexes. We also have, again, the risk of flooding, which has already caused millions of dollars of damage. We've had so-called 100-year storms happening far too frequently, several in the last 20 years. We're also going to see changes to food production globally that will have ripple effects. We all eat food that comes from around the world. And so to the extent that there's more droughts and wildfires, it will impact food production. As a coffee drinker, I was just reading an article about how the price of coffee is projected to go up substantially because of the growing climates are changing, and it could affect crop yields. We also have the issue of climate migrants. So people from warmer parts of the globe who are experiencing extreme heat or water shortages are going to be moving or trying to move to warm or more moderate climates. And so that's going to put pressure on our immigration system as more people try to, improve their quality of life by moving northward. So lots of things to be concerned about with climate change. It's why the city of Milwaukee is taking the issue seriously. We also need to acknowledge the racial inequities in Milwaukee, in not only the city of Milwaukee, but the Milwaukee metropolitan, metro area has a long history of racial inequities, and we have to acknowledge that the historical trauma of racism and discrimination, and really try to think about as we build an economy for the future, how can we do better? Um, just as one example, there's lots of different disparities, but I think the disparity in household income is really stark. The poverty rate for African Americans is 300% higher, um, and the Latino rate and the poverty rate for Latinos is 85% higher than for white Milwaukeeans. Black home ownership rate is half of that of white households. You'll see that household incomes for Black households is around 32,000, and it's near 60,000 for white families. So we've got to think about how to create a more equitable society. And underserved communities bear the brunt of climate change. I think we all face the risks of climate change, but when you have tougher socioeconomic circumstances, when the climate changes, you have less ability to adapt. And so underserved communities will bear the brunt of climate change. And that can be, in the form of, higher energy burden in their homes. It can be in the form of if people don't have air conditioning when it gets hot, it can lead to more health risks, things of that nature. So we need to think about how we address the equity issues while we're building a new, cleaner economy. As part of our greenhouse gas, as part of our climate and equity plan, we did a greenhouse gas inventory to determine where our emissions were coming from. We are working off of 2018 data, and that inventory shows that our community that year released about 7.7 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent in Milwaukee. And this pie chart shows you where a lot of that's coming from. 31% is from residential buildings, 23% is from larger commercial buildings, 22% from industrial processes and manufacturing, and about 21% from transportation. Milwaukee County's greenhouse gas inventory is similar, but they have a higher percentage of emissions coming from the transportation sector. So as you can imagine, the more people people spend in cars, the more likely we're going to have higher emissions from transportation. So this is the baseline that we're working from, and we have to get better from this target. And again, we're trying to reduce emissions 45% by 2030 from these levels. It's a very heavy ask, but we are up to the challenge, we believe. In order to meet our goals, we have 10 big ideas or strategies outlined in the Climate and Equity Plan. So the first is a Green Jobs Accelerator. That involves creating clear pathways to increase the number of people of color employed in family-supporting green jobs. These can be public outreach jobs. These can be jobs with the construction trades, installing new clean energy equipment. So there's lots of different fields that this can cover, but we want to create clear ladders of employment and career pathways so people can start at entry level, and as they gain skills, can move on to progressively higher wages and better life outcomes for themselves and their family. Number two is about healthy home energy upgrades. We know lower income households have a very high energy burden relative to wealthier households. That means they're spending a much higher percentage of their income on their energy bills. And in some cases, because the houses may be poorly insulated and have outdated equipment, in some cases, poorer families are spending more in real dollars than wealthier families on their energy budgets. So we need to do more to upgrade these homes, and we want to do it in a holistic way so that as we are in a house for lead or other issues that a city program might be in, that we are coordinating with those other programs to do energy efficiency. So number two is about retrofitting and fixing up our existing housing stock. And number three is about building new net zero energy homes. So net zero energy means that they're super insulated. They may be all electric and using heat pumps instead of gas furnaces. and then whatever energy is used can be offset by solar panels. So we want to start building new housing faster that's net zero energy. And one of the ways we are proposing to do that is to try to industrialize the manufacturing of housing so that we can at least build, if not whole modular units, at least wall panels in a factory and assemble them faster. The city has thousands of vacant lots, and we needed to have a better strategy to accelerate the amount of new homes built in the city of Milwaukee. Fourth strategy involves bigger commercial buildings. So the strategy here is to potentially require buildings to annually do benchmarking. That means annually reporting on their energy use to make the energy use in buildings more uh, publicly viewable, so that as tenants shop from one building to the next, so they can compare which buildings are more energy efficient. And eventually, we may have performance standards for buildings, meaning setting targets for larger buildings to reduce their emissions. We're not quite there yet, but we want to kind of phase in changes to the commercial building sector over time. Number 5 and 6 involve transportation. The first is about people-centered transportation and urban design. This means not only having more transit, buses and things like that to get people out of cars, but also redesigning our urban fabric so that it's denser, that it's easier to live in Milwaukee without having to rely on a single-use automobile to get around, and then also make our streets more pedestrian and bike friendly as well. Number 6 is about electrifying transportation. So the idea here is that we want to get cars off of petroleum long term and using renewable electricity to power their vehicles. And that means we need to have more charging stations. So car companies have been moving towards more electric, and we need to get more charging infrastructure built in Milwaukee so people can feel comfortable that they won't get stranded, but have lots of opportunities to charge their vehicles. Number 7 is really probably the most important of all the strategies, and that's greening the electric grid. So everything in the climate plan is premised on getting cleaner energy from the electric grid. So moving away from coal-fired power plants in particular, and long-term phasing out natural gas power plants and moving towards renewable sources of energy that are carbon-free. That means we want to work with our utilities to push them in this direction, but it also means supporting a robust and competitive rooftop solar market as well. Strategy 8 is about protecting and restoring nature in the city, so getting less pavement and more green space and trees, which helps us manage stormwater better and also reduces that urban heat island effect we talked about. Number 9 is about reducing waste and being more sustainable in what we consume. There's a particular emphasis on this strategy about redirecting surplus food that would otherwise go into a landfill and become methane, and instead trying to capture that food health that is still edible and feed hungry people. And we recently were awarded a $400,000 grant to help with this process. And then lastly, I was working with community-based organizations to hire what we call resilience ambassadors. So resilience ambassadors are working with trusted neighborhood-based organizations to connect underserved communities with available tools and resources to make their homes and neighborhoods more resilient to climate change, and also to connect with all the programs that the city has and all of the new funding sources that are available from the federal government through what's called the Inflation Reduction Act, the new federal climate bill. So those are the 10 big ideas, and all of them need to work together in order for us to be successful with our efforts to reduce emissions and make a better city. The creation of the plan took over 4 years and involved a ton of community engagement. 2019, the city and the county joined forces to create a task force on climate and economic equity. So we really worked closely with environmental groups, labor organizations, NAACP, city officials, county officials, and the like, to really have a broad plan that had a lot of community engagement. In 2020, we broke into smaller working groups on the different topic areas. That's when we got our emissions inventory done and started really getting the plan in place. In 2022, we started talking publicly about the big ideas, and including to the Common Council. We got our draft report written, and then in 2023, it was finally completed, and Mayor Johnson was able to sign the file into law in June of last year. We also transitioned the city county task force, which was a temporary thing to get the plan done. That was reconstituted as the city county advisory board on climate and economic equity. So now there is a permanent citizen-led body to help advise us on implementation of the climate and equity plan and to hold us accountable for ensuring that it gets done. We touched on some of this in the summary, but the Green Jobs Accelerator is really about making sure that all of the federal investments that are coming for climate, are reaching people in the neighborhoods where they live. So good job can really set person up for success in life. I believe in the dignity of work. I believe in the dignity of good paying jobs and not trying to exploit people. And I think that value is reflected in the climate plan. Again, we talked about the racial disparities in employment. And so we need to be intentional to make sure that the young people and people of color know what these green jobs are, know what the opportunity is, and have a fair shot at getting some of these jobs. And from a resilience standpoint, when people have better incomes, and can have a credit card or whatever, when those big climate events come, they have a better chance to respond. So you think about when there was Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, the poorest among us didn't have an opportunity to just go and leave town and get in a hotel for a couple days. I mean, when you don't have those resources, you are really in bad shape when climate events happen, right, or severe weather events happen. And so having good paying jobs supports resiliency as well. So our strategy is, first of all, we are hiring a green jobs coordinator. We're in the process of doing that. We're going to promote subsidized transitional jobs, working with Employ Milwaukee so that as people start to get into the training, there's supports for them to continue and take time out of their wage earning in order to get trained for higher skilled things. We're creating better resources so people understand what green jobs are. So we have a website now, but we're going to continue to improve it over time to connect people with and show the map of what the green jobs are, what the training opportunities are necessary to get those jobs, and then who the employers are on the backside that will actually hire you once you've done the training. We will track the progress of this through tools. That's particularly important when the city has contracts. We can require more when the funding is coming through the city. We're coordinating with local training partners like trade unions, WRTP Big Step, colleges, and associations. We're accelerating this with all the federal grants that are coming, and we're working with Milwaukee Public Schools, especially their Green Schools event this summer to talk about green jobs. Every single federal grant that we write there's a section on how are we going to support workforce. The federal government wants to see this, and we want to see it here as we implement the climate and equity plan as well. Number 2 is about healthy home energy upgrades. So the idea here is that, again, we are going to do upgrades to existing homes that will help them save energy and reduce the emissions from using all that energy. So we have a very old housing stock in Milwaukee. Much of it has been disinvested. Communities of color tend to have more environmental health issues from household lead and other problems from housing that hasn't been maintained as well as it should. And that creates a resiliency risk as well, because if you don't have a solid roof over your head, again, you're less likely to withstand the dramatic changes in weather. So we have to find ways to fix up our existing housing stock. So how are we doing that? Well, one, we support increases to the weatherization assistance program for lower income customers. We have a ME2 program that has been around for 10 years, and we want to continue that. That provides financing and technical assistance to homeowners that want to do energy efficiency from across different income levels. We want to support the work of Focus on Energy to get more people access to the statewide rebates that are available. And if we can, we want to do solar, rooftop solar on houses as well through our Milwaukee Shines program. We want to align energy efficiency and lead paint abatement work. So the city, through the American Rescue Plan Act, allocated millions and millions of dollars to lead abatement in homes. This health department recognizes that lead paint is the single biggest source of lead poisoning in children. And so we are coordinating our efforts with the health department so that when they go in to do lead abatements, we are also taking that opportunity to upgrade the home with energy efficiency. We're also developing long-term flexible funding for home energy upgrades. There's a lot of different funding sources for housing now, and we want to bring all that to bear. The Biden administration just announced billions of dollars for what they're calling green banks, and that'll also provide financing to do some of these upgrades going forward. We're coordinating housing repair programs to create a unified online navigation tool to help our resilience ambassadors and homeowners understand all of the different city programs that are available, all the programs that are available from nonprofit organizations to do home improvements, and then trying to coordinate that stuff so that if somebody needs weatherization, we don't go into that house and say, oh, too bad, you don't get weatherization because your roof is leaking. You got to fix that first. Good luck with that. But instead, we can point that homeowner, say, hey, yeah, you do need to fix that roof, and here's the programs that are available, so that all these different programs aren't operating in silos, but instead can we can work together to fix homes for all the things that are necessary to make them healthy. And then moving forward, this is a little bit longer term, but starting to electrify homes and moving away from gas-only appliances to start thinking about heat pumps that can provide both heating in milder, temperature ranges, and also cooling in the summer. So that's many parts of the country are going all in on electrification. I think in Milwaukee we are taking a cautious approach, but we do need to move in that direction long term. With regard to new net zero energy homes, again, housing is such a critical thing. When we talk to community groups about the climate plan, the two things that I hear over and over and over again are we need jobs and we need better housing. And so, as I talked about with our retrofit strategy, yes, we need to fix our existing housing, but some of the housing is in such bad shape that it's almost more cost effective to build new. It is more cost effective to build new. And when we build new, we have a better chance of getting all the way to net zero energy. So we do need to build more housing at a much faster rate. It's an equity piece because when there's a shortage of supply of housing, the price of housing just goes up. So we need to increase the supply of new housing. And we need to think about, building new with better drainage and all of these things to make homes more resilient to climate events. And we need to do that by prioritizing what's called infill development. So instead of just building new subdivisions out in the suburbs that people have to drive to, let's make sure we're recycling the land in our neighborhoods to get more new homes built. So this is obviously a complicated project. We do have $1 million of ARPA funding to put towards this effort, but we need to identify developers that can build faster and more cost effectively using new techniques. We have financing through an EPA grant. We published a net zero energy financing plan that can bring to bear new financing sources for housing. There is some housing getting built through the Community Development Alliance and other efforts, but we need to provide that extra gap financing to make sure the homes aren't just built to code, but are really above code and ultra energy efficient, and that requires upfront funding. And then we are also working to form a manufacturing partnership to try to get companies in Milwaukee to build homes year-round in a factory environment. And that's really important because, when we do what's called traditional stick-built construction, where you're just assembling the studs and everything on site, you can only work, part of the year. In the summer, you get less quality control. And so we want to build major housing components year round in a factory to try to, again, ramp up production much faster and create, again, better quality control for the housing and better working conditions for the employees. Number four is about commercial building benchmarking and performance standards. Commercial buildings make up about 18% of our energy consumption in the US and even a higher share of Milwaukee's greenhouse gas emissions. Many people are renters of commercial buildings. And so we have to find ways to drive down energy use in our commercial buildings. And we need to start thinking about sustainability features like battery backup storage and microgrids and all of those kinds of things. But what we are doing is we are starting with what's called a benchmarking policy. So this is requiring requiring commercial buildings to annually report on their energy use and use what's called EPA's portfolio manager to do that. Unfortunately, well, depending on your perspective, fortunately or unfortunately, the state of Wisconsin controls the building code. So cities do not have the ability in Wisconsin to enact a higher code for new construction with regard to energy. The state sets that code. I would argue we have a fairly middle of the road or mediocre code at the state level. But what cities, I believe, can do is require the reporting of energy use. And eventually we may phase in a building performance standard, which is saying, hey, here's what we think the energy use is reasonable on a per square foot basis. If you're already sustainable and hitting that, great. But if you're not, there might be performance standards that have to be met over time. We are also working to support the financing of small commercial energy efficiency improvements. We have developed what's called PACE financing for large buildings, property assessed clean energy financing, where large property owners can get loans. But we have found that many of the national lenders tend to not fund on smaller projects. And so we are hoping to work through the Inflation Reduction Act to get more financing for smaller scale projects, including multifamily buildings. So a lot of work is coming on that front. Number five is about people-centered transportation. Again, we all spend too much time of our lives in cars. Many of us driving around as a single occupant in an automobile. And so we need to think about redesigning our cities to support transit, biking, and bicycling, and start reducing the amount of what we call vehicle miles traveled by the general public. So we'd like to see that reduced by about 20%. And that means we need to rethink how our cities are designed. We know that disinvestment in public transit has disproportionately hits lower income folks who may not be able to afford a car. It reduces access to jobs. So it really is a significant problem, and we got to commit ourselves to public transportation. And from a resiliency standpoint, if we can connect people to better overall systems when bad stuff happens, if we have denser environments, it's easier to survive on a bike instead of having to, be totally out of luck if you don't have a car. So all of these things are really important. So what we're doing about it is we are improving and expanding public transit. Most of this is handled through Milwaukee County, but we're excited to see the expansion of their electric buses and bus rapid transit. The plan calls for eventually we'd like to see 8 different bus rapid transit routes. We need to prioritize walking and biking again. This has been a huge priority of Mayor Johnson to do what we call complete streets. And that means not just having really wide streets where, cars can zoom around town as fast as possible and swerve on the side lanes and that kind of thing, but rather redesigning the streets so that we have more protected bike lanes. We make them healthier for walking and slowing traffic down a bit so that it's safer and we have less traffic fatalities. And all of that reduces emissions as well. So rethinking our streets, and then also rethinking our land use policies. Again, things like transit-oriented development, thinking about zoning, and as we design neighborhoods, having more transit routes and the like. One of the residents that we had who participated in the climate an equity plan talked about the third ward, and the third ward is expensive to live in, but it's expensive because it's in part because it's so walkable and people want to live there. And it's expensive because we don't have enough neighborhoods like that. And to the extent that we can have more neighborhoods that are more walkable, it brings the price down, and it improves the equity and the access. If you think about places that you like to travel, at least I do, I like to go to cities that are very walkable and bikeable and have that kind of vibrancy. And so having pedestrian and bike friendly neighborhoods is really important for that. With regard to electric transportation, again, we're trying to reduce the amount of gasoline for the cars that are used. And we're going to have to be thoughtful about this. I think sometimes there's a perception that electric vehicles are only for, affordable to wealthier people. I don't think that's going to be the case forever. I think that's the case of most new technologies that, wealthier people tend to buy them at first, and over time it becomes more accessible to more people. But we do need to be intentional about that, so that more that communities of color have access to zero emission vehicles as well. So lots of work to do on transportation, but our major strategy is first look at city operations. The city passed an ordinance to require a transition to electric and low emission vehicles when it is cost effective and practical to do so. So we are implementing that policy now. We are hiring a new EV coordinator that we hope will start, in a month or so. And again, really trying to lead by example. We are trying to be very practical about this. So we are not requiring electric vehicles for certain specialty pieces of equipment if they're not even on the market yet. But we at least have the goals in place to start moving in that direction. Next, we want to build out a public EV charging network so that more people considering to buy electric vehicles know where to plug in. So we are trying to encourage a goal of that by 2030, 50% of all new vehicle sales will be electric. And in order for that to happen, people need to feel comfortable that there's a place to charge these. So there's a particular challenge for people who don't have a garage, but rather live in apartments. And so we need to think about how we can support the build out of an EV charging network. The main way we are doing that is by pursuing federal grants. The Biden administration has put billions of dollars into supporting an EV charging network. Recently, the state legislature passed a law that would open the door to that federal funding. There are two major buckets of federal funding. One is called NEVI, which is about getting EVs on the interstate highway system every 50 miles. So that is being handled by the state of Wisconsin. And our office is pursuing funding for community-based charging, level 2 chargers. Unfortunately, we weren't successful. The first application we put in, it was very competitive, but we will continue to pursue federal funding to get this charging network built. And we want to do it in conjunction with the private sector. We are consistent with the new state law that was passed. The city won't own all the stations, but we want to work through public-private partnerships to expand the availability of EV charging. We also want to raise public awareness about the value of electric vehicles through collaborations with Wisconsin Clean Cities, Renew Wisconsin, and others. All right, greening the grid, number 7, is hugely, hugely important. Most people are going to just flip the switch and get the electricity from wherever it comes from without a second thought. And so we really need to think about where the sources of fuel used to power the electric grid. And so we need to move away from coal, eventually from natural gas, to more renewable energy. This is a huge part of it. So 57% of what is necessary to get to our 2030 goal is through changes on the electric grid. In addition to the climate impacts, when we burn fossil fuels and coal plants in particular, it creates asthma risks and other localized air pollutant issues. So there's a lot of benefits to greening up the grid. Now, resiliency is really important. We know that solar and wind are intermittent sources of energy. The sun doesn't always shine. So the challenge is how do you make this transition and do it cost effectively and still have reliable power? And I think there's a lot that is on the horizon with regard to battery storage and other policies to try to make the overall grid resilient to climatic events. So we have a twofold strategy to do this. First of all, we are advocating to move towards cleaner sources of energy, in particular, um, phasing out of coal-fired power plants. So the city does not control the electric power grid. We Energies does. They are a regulated utility. They are regulated by the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin. And so we can advocate both through direct discussions with We Energies, as well as through the Wisconsin Local Government Climate Coalition. So we can talk to them directly, but we can also work with the regulators at the Public Service Commission to push in this direction. And that's exactly what we do. We also are a large user of electricity, as a city government is. And so we have worked with We Energies to develop a game plan so we can eventually procure 100% of our electric power from renewable energy sources by 2030. And just last month, Mayor Johnson signed an agreement where we will be procuring 25% of our electric power for city operations by 2025. So working with We Energies, we are going to expand the solar that was already on a landfill next to the airport. We're going to be doing 11 megawatts more, and that will get us to our 25% by 2025 goal. So very, very exciting, very significant progress on renewable energy. That's enough renewable energy to power over 80 city buildings with 100% power by 2025. So by next year, all of our police stations, all of our fire stations and libraries and more will be 100% renewable electricity. Number 8 is about protecting and restoring nature in the city. So the importance here is when we pave over too much stuff, A, it creates a heat island, B, it looks bad, and C, it creates major runoff problems when we do have extreme storms. So we need to have less pavement and more nature-based solutions, trees and green space to manage stormwater. These heat islands are concentrated in low-income areas. If you look at a map of Milwaukee, the denser urban environments where people of color tend to live have less tree canopy. So we need to address that. And when we have better tree canopy, we're more resilient to, extreme heat days. There's more places for the water to go in extreme storms. It just creates a healthier environment. So there's a number of branches, if you will, to this strategy. The first is protecting environmentally sensitive lands. So we have a number of areas that haven't been developed in Milwaukee County in particular, mostly along rivers. So we want to protect those from further development so that we have good buffers along our rivers of nature areas. We have a super exciting and successful partnership with Milwaukee Public Schools on redeveloping their schoolyards. There's a great nonprofit called Reflow that works with Milwaukee Public Schools, and the city actually contributes about $1 million a year to pulling up pavement on schoolyards and replacing it with healthy green spaces. We've been doing about 5 a year. We'd love to have the funding to expand that to 10 per year in order to get on track. But really, really exciting. It's probably some of our favorite programs that we're involved in because it's so exciting to see children who, rather than playing on the asphalt blacktop with the chain link fence, now they're recreating at recess in nature-based environments. It's just really wonderful to see. We want to support the Branch Out campaign. This was some of the nonprofits have gotten together to support, the idea of telling residents about the benefits of trees. So we support those efforts. And then lastly, we want to incentivize what we call green and cooling commercial lots. So far too many of our commercial streets have dedicated way too much real estate to pavement. And in particular, it's a particular pet peeve of mine when we see strip malls that have, asphalt parking and then no trees on the edge. And maybe they've even taken out where there used to be grass between the sidewalk and the street and put in an asphalt there. So we want to work with strip malls to at least depave those edges and plant trees in areas that have excess amounts of parking. And as we do more transit and people are biking and walking more, we don't need so much real estate devoted to parking spots. Strategy number 9 is waste reduction and sustainable consumption. So the idea here is that, not just the energy we use, but all of the consumer products have an environmental impact. I think plastic is one that is really concerning, especially after this past weekend with Earth Day, where many volunteers were pulling plastic out of the waterways. So we've become a disposable culture in many ways. And so we need to think about, are there better ways to manage our waste streams? This is a particular issue. There's an equity issue here with waste that ends up in communities of color, as well as just the fact that we're throwing so much in the landfill when people are still going hungry. And so we just need better systems to manage food and other waste. A number of people on the task force were very passionate about food waste because when food waste goes into the landfill, it can decompose anaerobically and become methane, which is a very powerful greenhouse gas. So the more organics we can keep out of the landfill, the better. So in the climate plan, we propose the Food Excess and Equitable Distribution Collaboration, otherwise known as the Feed Milwaukee Collaboration. And that's working with nonprofits, UW Extension, and food service providers to come up with better systems for managing food waste. The EPA has a hierarchy of how to manage food waste, and it starts with reducing, food waste at the source where it's produced. Next on the list is, having edible food not go to landfills, but instead feeding hungry people, and on down the list to composting, and at the bottom of the list is landfilling. And so we want to focus on that priority list, and if we can, create systems for helping people waste less food in the first place, and secondly, if they have excess food, like at catered events and whatnot, that some of that food can be rescued and redirected to people that are hungry. So we plan to roll out a food saver challenge later this year and look at some of the policy and funding barriers to do this. We are also trying to attract companies that would do plastic reuse systems, so not just recycling where plastic is melted, collected and melted down and turned into other things, but rather to be able to have more systems where takeout and other things can be washed and reused instead of just recycled. And lastly, we have resilience ambassadors. So the idea here is really working with community-based organizations to help get the word out, to get buy-in from community-based organizations about the climate plan, and ultimately to use them as trusted voices in the community to be ambassadors on resilience strategies and whatnot. So we have recently won EPA funding to hire resilience ambassadors. We're working with Clean Wisconsin and Sherman Park Community Association in particular to help get the word out and hire new staff to be climate ambassadors. We have an Eco Neighborhoods initiative where we are working with these organizations, but also volunteers, so that neighborhood groups that want to get together and do the right thing for the environment don't have to start from scratch, but instead can access city programs and nonprofit programs and get some guidance from us about how to put programming together. But we really need the energy of neighborhood-based organizations to help us deliver programs better and faster. And then building this network of resilience ambassadors across agencies so that they are well trained and know how to effectively talk to homeowners and get the word out and get people to use the programs that will benefit them. All right, so that's a lot. That's all of the strategies that we've would like to see, but it is not enough to have a plan that sits on the shelf collecting dust. We are moving right into implementation or to action in order to make this plan happen. So every single element of the climate and equity plan has already started implementation. This is incredibly exciting. When we adopted the plan, it was just about the time when the federal government approved billions of dollars for this work. So we are totally aligned with the Biden administration in terms of bringing funding and new resources to the city to make this transition. So for the Green Jobs Accelerator, Wisconsin Regional Training Partnership, WRTP, got a $1.6 million grant to develop training for electric vehicle charging technicians. We also got a $12 million USDA tree grant that it will allow us to hire a new green jobs coordinator and create transitional jobs for arborists. The second one, the holistic housing, we have the city allocated $2 million from ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act. There are huge tax credits available now for homeowners that do, have a tax burden where they can get tax credits for doing solar and energy efficiency work. And then for lower income residents, there's millions of dollars that are coming through the state of Wisconsin that will be available for rebates later this year. So that's not here yet, but it's coming. And then, of course, it's hard to get a rebate if you can't afford the projects on the front end. So then there's going to be billions of dollars of financing available through these new green banks that are being established. So we've already got our ARPA funded coordination underway. And we are also, with our environmental justice grant, we're going to be funding home energy rebates or audit assessments so that homeowners can be ready when the rebates come later this year. We have, for the net zero energy housing, we have a $1 million ARPA allocation. We had some hiccups. The first time we bid it out, we didn't get the team that was going to be able to deliver on the project. So we are rebidding that project and hope to have that out later this year. For the commercial building benchmarking, we are putting federal funding into a resource center to help commercial building owners understand how to do benchmarking. We are doing education and outreach right now to potentially get this policy passed in the next few months. So we are getting stakeholder input from the commercial building real estate sector and hope to have that one rolling later this year. For greening the grid, there are major new solar investment tax credits. I should update this slide. Just yesterday, the federal government announced that the state of Wisconsin will be getting about $64 million from what's called a Solar for All grant. So that's exciting. That will support lower income solar as well, but it'll come through the state as part of a statewide program. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the city just approved another 11 megawatts of solar to achieve our 25% by 2025 goal for city operations. For vehicle electrification, there's major new federal tax credits that you can get right now if you choose to buy an electric vehicle, including used electric vehicles. We have applied for Department of Transportation funds. I mentioned we didn't get it the first go around, but we will be reapplying. And we recently applied for a separate federal grant to get more electric vehicle charging installed. We're also hiring a new EV coordinator in the next month or two. So it's exciting that we all have dedicated staff to focus on this. People-centered transportation has been huge. The city has gotten $90 million of funding to redesign our streets to be complete streets. These include Valete and Villard and 6th Street. You'll see more and more protected bike lanes popping up. This is a major, major priority for Mayor Johnson, and it is happening. It is to the point that President Biden has been here announcing the major redesign. And it's the theory is that how we design our streets does have an equity impact, and it's really good to see the funding and the changes happening really rapidly. For nature in the city, we've just got a $12 million urban forestry grant. So we have won that. We put together a great partnership with the city's forestry department, Milwaukee Public Schools, the Sewerage District, our office, Milwaukee County, and community-based organizations. So we can finally start planting more trees in the city of Milwaukee and removing some of that pavement that we talked about. We just got a $400,000 compost and food waste reduction grant. So we'll be hiring a new coordinator for those efforts. And we also plan to provide mini grants to food pantries so that as they take in more food, some of it has to be composted, so that there'll be more composting infrastructure at our food pantries. And then lastly, with Resilience Ambassadors, I mentioned we got a $1 million environmental justice grant from the US EPA and are working with Sherman Park Community Association and Clean Wisconsin. So lots and lots happening. This has been a huge year for climate action, and we're very grateful to the support of the federal government to deliver this. We do plan to hold ourselves accountable, and you can hold us accountable as well for these actions. So on our website, milwaukee.gov/climate plan, there is a link to a public dashboard that shows, charts out a path to net zero by 2050, and also provides updates of all of these different programs. We are trying to keep that up, probably monthly, so that you can keep track of progress. So rather than waiting for an annual report, you can just check in on our website to see where we're at. We also communicate to the City County Advisory Board and do a biannual communication file to the City Council, and we will be updating our greenhouse gas inventories periodically as well. So that concludes it. I know that was a lot of information, but we at the Environmental Collaboration Office are your partners. We cannot do this in City Hall alone. We have to have collaboration. We will continue to collaborate with all who are willing to make Milwaukee a world-class eco city, and to really, give us hope that although there are major challenges from the climate crisis, we are ready to make the changes necessary to adapt, to be better, and to reduce our impact on the environment while creating a healthy, clean, vibrant economy. So please check out our website, milwaukee.gov/eco. Sign up for our quarterly newsletter, follow us on social media, and thank you for taking the time to join us today to learn about the Climate and Equity Plan and how we are implementing it going forward. Thank you.